All right, so I start many presentations with this slide, and we're here at the Cape May Point Arts and Science Center, so we have to incorporate a little bit of art, right? This is a piece called The Mystery of the Missing Migrants, which is done by the late, great Charlie Harper. And this, like any great work of art, has many various interpretations. One, it shows the complexity and the beauty of migration. It also shows a lot of bird migration happening at night, which to the uninitiated is kind of always a shocking thing. But a large majority of bird migration does actually occur during the nighttime hours. And for me, one of the things I find most interesting, intriguing, at times sad, are the gaps that you see in this image, which to me represent some of the birds that we've lost over time. You know, there's studies that have come out to show that we've lost something like 3 billion birds in the last half century, just here in North America. But it also speaks to what we don't know yet about bird migration. And to me, that's kind of what keeps me getting up each and every morning and doing the work that we do here at New Jersey Audubon's Cape May Bird Observatory. So to set the stage, we really should go way back in time. Cape May actually has about as long of an ornithological history and written record as any place in North America. There's actually written accounts that go all the way back to the late 1600s of some of the early European explorers that talk about the massive migrations of passenger pigeons through our region here. Sadly, of course, passenger pigeons are no longer with us. But up here we have Alexander Wilson, who was one of the first great ornithologists here in America. And Wilson has a couple of really deep connections here in Cape May. So that bird up at the top right, that is a bird called the Wilson's plover. And Wilson actually collected the type specimen right on the beach that's just really would have been a few hundred yards from where we are sitting right now. So this bird is named for Wilson, that he discovered to science in the 1800s. The bird on the bottom right there is actually called the Cape May warbler, and the type specimen also collected by Wilson in the 1800s in the northern part of Cape May County. And Wilson, he was no dummy. He had it figured out real early. Said if birds are good judges of excellent climate, Cape May has the finest climate in the United States, for it has the greatest variety of birds. So today, I'm honored and privileged to kind of carry the torch when it comes to a lot of our bird migration study through New Jersey Audubon and the Bird Observatory. We do a lot of our work through long-term monitoring projects that we call visible migration counts. The oldest of those is our Cape May Hawk Watch. We also do a seabird migration count and a morning flight count. Those all occur in the fall. And fall has traditionally been the season, going all the way back to the 1800s, when most bird study was done in Cape May. So what in the world is a visible migration count anyway? Well, it's a method that we can use for sampling populations of birds that migrate through a given area over a long period of time. There's other ways of doing this, and there's other bird observatories all around the world that, depending on their geography, their staffing, species of interest, they may do some other version of this. It may be bird banding. It may be regular surveys of a small area. For us, being that we have perhaps one of the greatest visible migration laboratories in the world here in Cape May, we use this method. So we have an observer, or at times observers, who conduct counts from the same point within the same dates using the same methodology and effort during each year. And count sites for visible migration counts are typically situated in pretty notable geographic locations, places that will concentrate migrating birds on their journeys, so peninsulas, mountain ridges, rivers, and lake shores. And as I alluded to, Cape May, given its geography as a southward-facing peninsula, is easily one of the best locations on our continent to witness visible migration. And a lot of that, again, traditionally in the fall, if you think all these birds migrating south through eastern North America, they get swept with prevailing winds out to the coast, and then not wanting to fly over water, they eventually funnel into the Cape May Peninsula. And that's where a lot of the magic naturally happens. So we'll continue on the history lesson here. If you head over to the Cape May Point State Park, just across the street here, in the big parking lot, on the far side of the lot, you'll see a large wooden platform. And that is the location of the Cape May Hawkwatch, where we conduct our fall monitoring of the diurnal raptor migration. The fellow up there with the very fashionable visor is a guy named Pete Dunn. And Pete really helped put Cape May on the map as a bird watching destination and bird study destination back in the 1970s. So this is the first year of the Hawkwatch, and you can see that he has commandeered a lifeguard stand. And over time, through a lot of the data that Pete was collecting and through his writings and through various other means, it got more popular and more people showed up. And so here is an early version of the Cape May Hawkwatch. And over time, it got more and more popular. More people got into birding, and more people really started to gain an interest in watching hawks in migration. And now today, we run this project over at the Cape May Point State Park, September 1st through November 30th. And in an average season, about 35,000 people join us to watch the raptor migration. We also have our Avalon Sea Watch. It happens at the very north end of Avalon, so about 15 miles north of here. And you may soon recognize the fellow there in the blue jacket. It's Clay Sutton, who's about to talk to us about some birds. But there was a guy named Dave Ward who discovered that this was a great location to see migrating seabirds back in the 1980s. And through the efforts of Dave and Clay and others, they collected enough data to convince New Jersey Audubon to establish a full-time count. It gained popularity. These are all double-crested cormorants you can see flying past here. And another Clay Sutton sighting. And this is what we have today. The count now sits on the beach at the north end of Avalon. We have this great structure from the Public Works Department, and we have a few thousand visitors that come to join us. And this is a migration that can include over 1 million birds in a single season. So it's an absolute spectacle. But enough of that. We're not here to talk about the fall today. We are here to talk about the spring. So we're going to bring back our old friend Charlie Harper one more time. This is another art piece that he actually commissioned for the Bird Observatory about 20 years ago. And so all the birds on the right side of the lighthouse, we've got a pretty good feel for what they do, how many of them we might expect to see, when they migrate. But all this stuff on the left was never formally studied until about 15 years ago. And that is when myself, and there's a version of myself from about 15 years ago with a lot more hair, and some of my colleagues and fellow bird nerds all got together right here, right on the dunes here in Cape May Point. And we started to get together, usually on weekends when we were available, and started to record the number of birds that were migrating past the dunes there. In time, kind of like the other watches that we just talked about. We found a few more people that were interested in doing this. We got New Jersey Audubon and the Bird Observatory to also take an interest in it. And this is actually a photo from 2017, where we actually were able to recruit volunteers to help us construct essentially a full season count of all the birds migrating past Cape May Point. And we actually had volunteers, some of the younger folks there, that are from Canada and even Sweden, who came to help us do that. So today, since 2019, eventually I did enough, probably like thousands of hours of work there, mostly for free, mostly on unemployment checks, to eventually convince the powers that be that we should have a spring migration project to complement our fall projects. So today, you can go out. It's right here around the corner at Coral Avenue where it meets the dune. Sunrise to 6 hours after, every day, March, April, and May. And we record every single migrating bird as it flies past. So, it's every single bird, every single species, but we need to have some kind of objectives here, right? So one of the main things we're looking for is, like we said, establishing a baseline of how bird migration unfolds here in the spring. Like we said, really good idea in the fall, but in the spring, there's a lot of unknowns. We're looking for trends in the phenology, so the migration timing. We're looking at changes in volume for as many species as we can record enough data to say something about. And where possible, we're also recording data on age, sex, and other features, more than just putting a label on a bird and saying goodnight. We also want to see if we can figure out differences in migration timing and behavior within species. And then once in a while, because we're up on a dune, we're looking out over the water, it's a concentrating geographic feature for many migrating animals. Sometimes we see things that are not birds. And we're actually working with the Cape May Whale Watch and Research Center on recording a species called harbor porpoise that is not super well known in our part of the world. And it turns out early in the spring, so sometimes February and March, we can actually see harbor porpoise from the platform where we do our monitoring work. And we've actually been able to photo document a few of these, which to our knowledge are some of the only photo documented harbor porpoise in our area. Later in the season, we'll also see some migrating insects. So we even see some monarch butterflies on their way north. Sometimes we can see a number of dragonflies, and every once in a while, a wayward bat as well. So that all sounds good, but of course it comes with a number of challenges, right? We just trot a few people up with binoculars and telescopes and then hope for the best, right? So one of the issues for us is the weather conditions. And we're always starting on March 1st, but if it's super mild, the migration for some of the really hardy species has already begun. In a year like, this year, March 1st looks a lot different, right? So there are far fewer birds moving on March 1st. So that's something that we sort of have to contend with when we look at trends year to year. There's also the issue of volume and diversity. So some days have the potential for us to record over 10,000 individuals of over 100 different species of birds. Birds are also quite distant here on average in the spring. So in the fall, we have the concentrating effect from the peninsula. It helps to funnel birds down to the end here. But for a lot of birds in the spring, they have to cross the water to get back to us. And that is definitely something that many birds are not really interested in. And if they are, they're often kind of spread all over the landscape. We'll talk about that in just a second. So if you show up in the fall, you can come to our Avalon Sea Watch. Uh, it's real nice and easy. The birds come right down the coastline, fly right past you. They don't pause. There's pretty organized lines. The hawkwatch tends to be a little more complicated. There's some species, like say ospreys or peregrine falcons, that love the water and they'll fly right across the Delaware. And then other species, like the soaring birds, think like red-tailed hawks, they require the sun's energy, right, to move across the landscape. And as soon as they get out over the water, there's none of that. So a lot of those birds actually turn back and go up toward Philadelphia. But still, on the whole, you can see the birds move across the bottom of the island and then choose their next adventure. At the Springwatch, as you can see, here's some of the primary lines that we are seeing birds migrate on. So some of our shorebirds and sandpipers, they're coming into Delaware Bay. Species like common loons are also coming in overhead. We have some birds that are resting in the bay at night and then fly out during the morning. And, you know, that's just going to be part of the deal when you're trying to record every single thing. Our projects in the fall are really just focused on a subset of birds. So it's something that we don't have to deal with quite as much. So let's talk about the data collection side of things. Once again, here is a version of me with a lot more hair. Every time I see myself, I'm a little more envious every time I do this presentation. So traditionally, this is how we would collect data. And it would require somebody showing up at our field sites with a big bag of these tally counters. Any folks that ever worked in a shop of any sort doing inventory, often you kind of use these little things to keep track. We use them for birds. Once in a while, we still use them, but back in the day, this was the primary way that we would keep track. And so we keep data on an hourly basis. And that also meant that you had to have a nice supply of these paper data sheets, which I traditionally was very good at spilling coffee on or spilling water on or letting sit out in the rain. And so we would record data for an hour, and then at the end of the hour, we would go back to all those tally counters and read the numbers off, and then make sure we were scribbling in the right box, and it was a pain. So today, we use electronic data entry. So all data in the field is entered in real time on a tablet, and we have a specialized application called Trectellen, and this is a global network. It was actually originated in the Netherlands, and this is a kind of a clearinghouse for all sorts of bird migration data. Some are visible migration counts like ours, some are bird banding projects. You can also have passive recording units that actually are recording the number of calls at night. So here's an example of what a Springwatch day looks like in the Trectellen system. And you can see it can be a wide variety of birds. We're recording in a general sense what direction they're flying, so that is the south and east and north and west columns. And then the species that have the little stars, you can actually move your cursor over them, say on the website there, and that will tell you additional details if they are males or females, adults or immatures. So let's talk about a few of the birds. So this is a northern gannet. Actually, it's a whole bunch of northern gannets. If we had a mascot for our spring monitoring work, it would be the northern gannet. And these are pretty spectacular. They have a wingspan of about 6 feet. I'm exactly 6 feet. Most gannets weigh about 5 to 6 pounds. And these are fish-eating, plunge-diving seabirds. And they're very, very interesting in that we think the Western Atlantic breeding population, and this bird only occurs in the Atlantic Ocean, North Atlantic, um, is around maybe 200,000 individuals. It's not unusual for us, both spring and fall, to see over 100,000 northern gannets from shore on their migration in Cape May. So this is a very, very important species. It tells us a lot from an environmental standpoint, and it's also a species that we can readily count in large numbers here. So it's an important one for us to track. And here's just a general kind of flow of how the season works for gannets. These are early migrants. In fact, a lot of years, especially when it's quite mild in February, they're already moving when we get out there on March 1st. So it's not unusual even by about Valentine's Day in a warm February, not this year obviously, that there's quite a few gannets on the move. They tend to peak right around the end of March, and then by the time we get to May, I didn't even include May on this chart because they're pretty much gone. And these birds, they're on their way, the adults are on their way up to Atlantic Canada, where they nest on high sea cliffs. And there's really only a handful of colonies in the Western Atlantic. So 200,000 birds, and they all go to nest in about 5 or 6 different places. And like we were saying, we're able to, especially with our new technology for recording data, we're able to record how many are adults and how many are not. So gannets are interesting. They're 4 or 5 years to get to an adult plumage. So a bit like the bald eagle, right? So they're long-lived birds. They won't start nesting until they're about 3 or 4 years old at earliest. So the blue line here shows us adults, and we can see that they are really just about out of here by about mid-April. And you can see the later timing for the immatures, which we don't typically see the full species total until early in May. And then you can explore all through the Trek-Talon website as well, and it will show you all the biggest days. And so you can see kind of a good spread there. Any day in March or April, especially if you have a strong south or southeast wind that tends to drift the gannets inshore, you can get big totals. I think Bob is here. Bob was here. Bob was here for the number 4 day. Last year, we actually had a group from Columbia University, and we're able to show them one of the biggest Springwatch days in history for this bird. This is the common loon, and this is another bird that is kind of a keystone species for us in the spring. Common loons are really interesting in that they live double lives of sorts. So, you know, a lot of people are familiar with this bird. They nest on these very tranquil ponds and lakes all through the northern tier of the US and into Canada. And then in the winter, they do the exact opposite thing. They actually fly, a lot of them, out to the Atlantic coast and out onto the ocean itself. So sometimes when Melissa and I are out on the boat in January or February, it's not unusual to see this bird at 25, 30, 50 miles offshore sometimes, wintering in large rafts. So common loon is, we've discovered, primarily an April migrant here. And this is gives us a pretty nice little bell curve. They might start at the very end of March, and then typically somewhere between about April 12th and April 20th, most years we'll see the biggest single day flight for this bird. This year was actually our biggest ever season for common loon in spring. And we actually had a single day with over 1,000, which is the largest flight, to our knowledge, ever recorded in Cape May. So we're going to switch it up. The birds at the bottom there, those are northern gannets. But the birds above, they're also white with black wingtips, but these are actually white ibis. And white ibis traditionally was a quite rare bird here. It's kind of a bird if you go to Disney World and you're eating your picnic lunch somewhere at Disney World, these are the birds that may try to steal some of your food. They're quite numerous, traditionally up to about the Carolinas, and then beyond that, it's a pretty red letter day to see one. But that has changed recently. So you can see the first several years that we recorded data in Tractellen, 0, 2, 0, 6, 12, and then especially once we got to the past 3 years, we're now seeing thousands of white ibis, both spring and fall. And this is a bird that went from being rare in Cape May County to being a breeding bird in Cape May County. So if you go up to Ocean City, a lot of folks know, the Welcome Center at the north side of town on the causeway, there are tons and tons of these white ibis now. So what's interesting for us is when we started doing this work, this was a one-off thing to see. And now we're seeing that this species is establishing a pattern from a migratory standpoint. We can expect now to see them at certain times on certain weather conditions. So that's a really interesting thing for us to be able to describe this new migratory pathway that hadn't existed before. I have just this one shaky video, and these are willets. So yeah, this is a bird called a willet, and it is a type of sandpiper, more of a mud piper. They actually nest in our salt marshes. And they don't look like too awful much until you saw the one get up there and flap its wings. So willets are really neat in that they actually migrate from Brazil to get here, and they continue up into New England. They nest in coastal marshes all through New England. But for most of the year, these birds actually spend their time in mangrove-packed shorelines along Brazil into Suriname. So they're only with us typically from about mid-April through about mid-July. So it's a really, really short period of time. And they're also really interesting birds in that most of our sandpipers, shorebirds, they're migrating to the Arctic tundra to nest. So the willet is fairly exceptional in that it actually stays in our latitudes to nest, but is also still a long distance migrant. So we didn't really know what to expect when it came to willet. But it turns out if you are here in the second half of April, you can sometimes see large numbers of these willets in migration. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about some true pelagic birds and how their appearances here seem to be changing somewhat. So this is a look at a late season nor'easter, essentially, from a few years ago. This is something that we seem to be seeing a little bit more and more of late in the season. Coastal type storms, things that you would expect to see in January or February. And these produce a lot of onshore winds, which is kind of an interesting part of the equation, because then you end up with species like this, Arctic tern, which some people are very familiar with as being one of the longest distance migrating birds in the world, right? These birds actually fly from the Arctic down to about Antarctica and back every single year. At our latitude, these birds are typically traveling at the very edge of the continental shelf, if not beyond it. So again, if we can make it out on the boat next weekend, we may see a few of these birds at, say, 75, 80, and 90 miles offshore, which is where you'd expect to see them. But when we get these coastal storms, they can actually bring them much closer to shore, and you actually see them from shore. So traditionally, we actually thought that this was an extremely rare bird to see from shore. But since we've had the monitoring project in place, we record these birds now almost every spring from shore. So whether that's a change in distribution that is driven by these more frequent storms, or whether it's increased effort, whether it's advanced technology with cameras to allow us to identify these because they look like a couple other species as well. Probably a combination, but it's an interesting bird for us to think about and continue to track here in the spring. And then finally, I want to talk about this bird, which was right here, right off our beach here, just a few days ago. This is a European storm petrel, and it showed up on that most recent bout of east winds and fog that we had. This is the first time that this bird was ever seen from shore in the United States. So again, with this kind of work, we're always focused more on the common birds, the numerous birds, and looking at trends. And rare birds are fun, but they don't always tell us as much, right? But this is a significant sighting and something that was completely unexpected. And folks will now, I'm sure, look at various aspects of this sighting, including the weather ahead of time, various other environmental factors to see if maybe there'll be more sightings like this in the future. But like I said, this is a bird that's only been recorded a handful of times in the United States, and from dry land, this was the first time ever. So that's all to say that there's still a lot for us to learn. We just wanted to touch on just a handful of things that we're really kind of looking at, that we're trying to learn. Tomorrow is the last day of our spring monitoring season. So if you would like to come visit, starting at sunrise tomorrow, which is really early now, but around like 5:30 to about 11:30 tomorrow morning, there will be folks up on the dune crossover at Coral Avenue, and we would be more than happy to see you up there and talk to you a little bit more about the birds that migrate past in the spring. And we'll have binoculars, telescopes, and we'd be happy to share it with you. So thanks for sitting through this, and I hope you're all having a great day.